most American speech. Hi. Hi. How are you? Well, I thought I would first of all let you know a little bit of how I expect to proceed, a little bit further than I said last evening. This morning I'm going to take a great deal of time in a kind of review, which for those of you who were here last week may be slightly boring, but on the other hand it may point up some things that you failed to note. The thesis that our attention span, as Theosophical so beautifully told us, ranges anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes and then dips and then comes up again, and we'll see if after 45 minutes you need to at least stand up and stretch. We may all need to do that. I think it's a good idea in any event. Some of the things that I said last week in introducing the entire subject may have been during that period immediately following the first 7 to 10 minutes during the dip, and on the thesis that if you say things often enough, the dips are covered, and you have a nice, plateau of knowing. That's nice. I think it won't hurt any of us to sort of establish our grounding again and our approach. I hope you will bear with me for that. And then introduce a bit of what we're doing with stanza 7. Then tomorrow we'll look more particularly at the first shloka of stanza 7, and then Tuesday, shlokas 2 and 3, more or less. This is more or less the order. Wednesday, 4th and 5th shlokas, Thursday the 6th, Friday the 7th shloka, and Saturday the summing up and review. That more or less is a pattern. As I always say, more or less, because one never knows how far one will get in any one day. And of course, if we accomplish it more quickly, my portion of the school will be finished early. There are those who run the race more swiftly. And so if we finish more swiftly, the final mornings will be free. Watching Ianti's expression to see whether I get out of this. But I thought, there are the laggards, those who may have to remain next week, and there are those who finish the course, get up to the mountaintop more swiftly. Isn't that right? So we'll see where we all end up. Well, so far as our studies of the stanzas are concerned, and as I indicated last night, I have approached this from the point of view of the stanzas. In a sense, I am doing it in violation of what HPB herself said. But that does not concern me very much. She was not here to reprimand me. And
how do you know?
I have not felt any slaps on the wrist.
Yes.
Occasionally I have heard faint whispers from afar saying, "Flapdoodle." Otherwise, I have dared to do what she told us not to do. She said if you expect, you remember in that little work of Bowen's notes, which is generally available as How to Study Theosophy, she said if you expect to read the Secret Doctrine straight through and derive from it some intelligible understanding, you're mistaken. And consequently, I suppose, all generations of Theosophists since that time have followed this and hesitated to read it straight through, feeling that they would then only add to their ignorance. And perhaps that is all we have been able to do. I do know, of course, in Canada, that they have indeed dared to read it straight through over and over. Am I right, Ernest? I know in Toronto that was true, beginning to end. But mostly we have tended to approach it very much as both Jeffrey and Adam have. But I feel that the stanzas are so pregnant with significance and meaning, so full of symbology, that they awaken in us something deeper than simple intelligibility. They awaken a kind of knowingness that defies description, analysis, language. So I have done it that way. And so in our studies, we've come to the final stanza of the first volume, the general subject of which you will recall is the cosmogonic process, the establishment and continuance of a manifested system. The seventh act of the drama, we've been following so intently, is in very many respects both a recapitulation and a summary of the cosmogonic processes, as well as a look into, and what she herself calls, the anthropocosmogenesis, so that it becomes a kind of prelude to seeing how all of this is reflected in the processes of being human. It, therefore, stanza 7 is much more than a simple recapitulation. It presents the magnificent teaching, I think, concerning our own heritage and even more splendid future, at the same time detailing the stages by which the living process of cosmogenesis gives rise to our entire psychophysical structures and vehicles. Therefore, just as one might study the first stanza in this series, outlining the cosmogonic process, and arrive at a total system by simply indicating that what has been not now must be, that now, in a sense, we have a recapitulation of the process, and this could serve us as a kind of central key to unlock the entire doctrine. The very beginning words of the first shloka of stanza 7 call us to this. Behold the beginnings of sentient formless life. Now, just on the surface, it would seem that therefore there's been no life up to this point, which is, of course, the most ridiculous statement I think one could possibly make. Because through and through, if we agreed on this, the metaphysic that is presented is that consciousness is primary. Is consciousness life? Can there be life without consciousness, consciousness without life? If we read this, you see, simply in a surface way, we could say, well, only by this time has life entered. What has happened up to this stage? You see, has it been processed simply of non-life? If everything in both a manifested and unmanifested system, if both in the manifested and the unmanifested is life, is living, is pulsating, then certainly life has been present from the very beginning, if there is a beginning. And certainly when we dealt with the awakening, what awakened? Form, dead form, non-life. This calls us to realize that this very statement, behold the beginning of sentient formless life, is then a recapitulation in which now it is not something out there, something that we have been observing, but that we behold, that we look at. And therefore, by our very looking, as I've said so frequently, we become, we alter that which we are looking at. We add to it, we change it. We are indeed in this participatory universe. indeed, in one place, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact reference, but I think it's in one of her early writings in the Theosophist, HPB indeed defines theosophy as a direct beholding. A marvelous phrase that I think has much in it, a direct beholding. Now, what is it that we behold? This may call to our minds, of course, the concept that I suggested, that some scholars define avalokiteshvara, the potency, the creative potency underlying manifestation or impelling manifestation, may be translated as the looked at sound. And so to behold this entire throbbing, pulsing, moving process is to look at, to project then, and look at the sound that is forever being sounded and therefore possibly heard. So, as I say, it may be useful before we proceed to at least remind ourselves of a number of factors. First of all, to remind ourselves that, as HPB herself constantly pointed out, we've been given only a very fragmentary glimpse into the complete system. Fragmentary as it may be, however, we certainly have enough to keep us occupied for a very long time, and I presume the European School of Theosophy, along with the Crotona School and similar enterprises, will be in business for many years to come in the exploration of these doctrines and concepts. I do not pretend that, for example, what I have given you is now a conclusion and you need look at volume 1 and no longer. You can just set it aside and say that's it. I'm sure that Jeffrey would agree with me on that, and Adam would agree that in spite of his excellent book, that this is not all that could be said. That this is the final session, therefore, of the European School of Theosophy, because we have now explored it to the limit. We realize there are those individuals, you know, we used to get them at our national headquarters, and I presume you get them in your countries, who borrow the Secret Doctrine, and after the limited time permitted by our library rules, which in our headquarters is a month, return the volumes and say, all right, I have read those, what do I read next? As though that is the finality of it. Well, therefore, we have emphasized, or I have emphasized at least, certain significant facts that I would simply like to review for you, particularly in dealing with the stanzas. And that is that in dealing with the stanzas, we really do have to accustom ourselves to a different mode of knowing than that which, for the most part, our studies have accustomed us. I think this is the first and basic point, and I'm emphasizing it again as I emphasized it at the very outset. A different mode of knowing. This was the basis on which this experimental study course was prepared at Crotona, and which we have been attempting to see what its value might be in terms of arousing that mode of knowing. I've said previously, and so I simply repeat, that what makes the doctrine secret is simply that until we have awakened within ourselves that mode of knowing, which is a direct beholding, which is pointed to here. Behold. We are told very clearly, we're not, in previous stanzas, it's as though it's objective. This happened. Mother swelled, all of this, the army of the voice, all of this was as though it was, we're being told it. Now we're being told that we have to look at it, behold it, and it's a direct beholding. It's not, of course, by this, we often mean intuition, yes, spiritual perception, spiritual discrimination, intelligence in its highest sense. But I have very much liked the words, a direct beholding. There is no film between us and that which we are perceiving. There is no shadow cast in any way whatsoever. We do not cast a shadow on the teaching. I've always been intrigued by the concept that there is indeed in one of the schools of mystic yoga in the Mahayana tradition, the concept that the adept, the individual who has come to this realization, has three characteristics. The first of which is he does not wink. The second of which is he does not cast a shadow. And the third is he does not perspire. I think these are the characteristics of the individual who has come to this mode of knowing. He does not wink. Winking is indicative of sort of closing, well, several things. Closing one's eyes to that which one doesn't want to see. It's also often brought about by particles of dust get into the eye and we wink and attempt to get them out. So that there is a clear seeing. The eye is open, the opened eye of Dhamma, you remember. The eye is clear and it sees. He does not cast a shadow. Now this, I think, is a rather interesting one because, of course, we all cast shadows on each other, on the teaching, on the doctrines. This very presentation, it shadows it to some extent. I am casting my own shadow upon it in that sense. And often we're content with the shadows that are cast upon it. That is, the interpretations that are given. And you are being subjected to the Joy Mills theories, so to speak, Joy Mills shadows. I try to keep them as slim as possible, although that's difficult with the amount of tea and coffee one drinks here, etc. Biscuits in between and all the rest of it. The shadow grows larger, I'm sorry to say. I only hope that the mental shadow does not become too obscuring for you. But this does not cast a shadow is a very marvelous. This is the fact that one is indeed the light shines through without any obstructions. And of course it should be effortless. That is, he does not perspire. So in the Secret Doctrine and in the letters from HPB's Mahatmic teachers, emphasis is placed again and again, as I've already pointed out, that there is a life, a way of life, which must be observed if one would come to the wisdom, a view to which we are generally quite unaccustomed in our normal educational systems and in all our training. We can be brilliant engineers, geniuses at mathematics, physics, whatever, and be at the same time perfectly lousy people. Not just, alcoholics and drug addicts and so on, but just plain lousy people. We can, get angry, irritated, stomp around, and do all the rest. And it makes very little difference in terms of this knowledge of being an engineer or physicist or whatever. There's no relationship between one's mode of life and one's knowing. Here we are all the time reminded that the message embedded in this method of exposition is simply live the life and you will come to the wisdom. That there is indeed not simply an additive factor of facts, of knowledge, that one continues into this storehouse of memory, which is no place, as we've already discussed, but that there is now a direct beholding which is possible, which is of a completely different order, than simply the addition of facts, of tidbits of knowledge that one takes away and brings out at appropriate times. The second factor, of course, that I have commented many times in previous sessions is the problem of language. Now, this is not simply the ordinary problem of language, of translating English into French, German, Finnish, whatever it may be, or even finding appropriate words in English, from American words to English words to New Zealand words or whatever. But it is basically that there is, within language itself, that we have to learn to tolerate paradox and ambiguity. Words usually stand for things. And because we have been, in our Western culture at least, so used to giving attention to objective phenomena, we have failed to perceive subjective movements. And this, I think, is something that we can be very much indebted to contemporary physics for pointing up to us this matter of need for a language that defines process. Another book that I think helps us very much in this, which I think I haven't referred to so far, but I think is a very useful work, is a small paperback called The Looking Glass Universe. It's a very fascinating overview of contemporary thought in a number of fields, but points up particularly the difficulty that many thinkers in science, at least today, are having with this problem of language, where we can no longer define categories as to assign thingness to process. And therefore, the physicist above all is having to discover a language. And that's where I have turned in times to the very difficult language of Dr. Günther in The Matrix of Mystery, because it involves us in words in another dimension, if I can put it that way. And because of the very difficulty of the words, some of which are really defy translation, as we've already seen, we somehow get a deeper understanding and come to a deeper insight into what is meant. And then finally, of course, I have pointed out the question of method, that this is not presented as most textbooks are, which I think is one reason that we can keep reading it over and over and studying it ever more deeply, because there is a method of exposition which is unique. Well, we have to keep these factors in mind very much, and of course keep in mind, as we all recognize, that there is a triple root of the Theosophical metaphysics, and that it is this triple root presented in the three fundamental propositions that exposes us to the primary processes that are involved. And I can only say exposes us to these primary processes. The processes of becomingness, if you like, the processes of being, against the background of what HPB calls beingness. So it exposes us, and that is always there in our mind. Now, at this point, we could perhaps look just briefly, and I think it will help us all, at the summary which HPB herself gives of these stanzas, these 7 stanzas. This is in the proem, and it may be useful. On page 21 of the original volume, and it's at the very end of the proem of, so for those who have the Adyar edition, the very end of the proem, in which she summarizes the stanzas. And I think it's very useful at this stage, before taking up the 7th one, to rather look at this, because looking at her own exposition helps us to understand what she was talking about. She says, very simply, that the first stanza describes the state of the one all during pralaya, before the first flutter of reawakening manifestation. So it is pre-process, and yet it is not without process. It is not without motion. It is not without a reference to that which will be. So it is in that, in a sense, the solution out of which will, according to the matrices or axial structures that will reveal themselves, the manifested universe will concretize itself, will begin to form itself. So it is both pre-process and the presentation of archetypal process, if you like. It is the helpful manner in which we can recognize that even in the state of pralaya, the state of that dissolution of all into one homogeneous substance, or viscous mass, if you like, out of that will be emergent, radiating, is perhaps the better word at this stage, radiating that which makes possible the whole system. Now, as she says, the stage described in stanza 2 is so nearly identical with that mentioned in the first stanza that to express the idea of its difference would require a treatise in itself. We have really not dealt with these first 2 pre-process and yet process stages. A great deal of time could be spent on just these 2. It is here in describing this, you see, that HPB points out that it must be remembered that all these stanzas appeal to the inner faculties rather than to the ordinary comprehension of the physical brain. So that, again, is one reason I felt we really, you see, if we are thinking of the developmental stages of human consciousness, then we should be, I feel, we should be alert to everything that will help us into a further expansion of consciousness, into this next developmental stage, frequently referred to as the 6th developmental stage. That there, you know, in the language to which we are accustomed in the Theosophical literature, what HPB calls the 6th subrace of the 5th root race, which is a foreshadowing then of something that will only come into flower in not very far in the future. But on the other hand, if we are to, in some way, begin to have at least a glimmer of what is intended, of what is meant, then we should be using every means that we can to unlock a new mode of knowing, shouldn't we? And so contact with these stanzas, runes, koans, really they are, and see if they do not only appeal to the inner faculties, but help to awaken some new way, some new mode of knowing. And it's because of that knowingness that our lives then reflect that in a new manner, you see. Again, coming back to this thesis that I continue to emphasize, that we exhibit this. We, if you like, Fritz Kuntz used to use a phrase that we've talked in a sense about these fields that have emerged. The field which is the creative hierarchy itself, the field which, in other words, there's not the field and then it's occupied, so to speak. I think Adam made this clear, didn't you? But rather that the field and the hierarchy is one. It's all one. Fritz used to say, man is the chief test object in the universe because he is the test object in every field, every one of the fields. All of it is present, but not awakened, not consciously present, but all of it is present. Now, if we are to make it consciously present, we have to use every device, as it were, to stimulate this knowing. And its representation then comes, we exhibit it. We are different, you see. Someone commenting on the experience, which is an archetypal experience, of the Master Jesus in these archetypal stages that are depicted there in the mysteries in the Christian system, that when he returned from the Mount of Transfiguration, he looked the same to all of those who were waiting at the base of the mountain, so to speak, but he did not see the same. And so there came a realization that something had happened to him. And it's not, you see, it harkens back perhaps in one sense to this question which HPB asks in an interesting article which appeared in the Theosophical. It's in one of the collected writings, and you might as well hunt for it. I can't remember which one. What is a master? And in effect, she says, would you know a master if you met one in the street? Well, I very much doubt it. There are many people that have a vague resemblance. They have beards and long hair, and they may wear, they may even wear, turbans and, and so on, wear robes. We have a lot of them. Many of them used to visit Adyar. For one occasion, I was living there, we had two contenders, both of them claiming to be the same one, and one of them beat up the other and gave him a wide You remember that, Marion? I think you were there. And I think it was something I had to deal with. I mean, how do you sort this out when they begin to sort of fight each other, you see? But the point is, would we recognize this unless there is an inner faculty awakened? And this is what HPB points out in this article, What is a Master, you see. That it's by an inner training, it's by an inner development and so on, not by some. And yet outwardly there is an exhibition, as it were, there is the presentation, or what Günther calls the presencing, which is different. The presencing, so that there is a kind of presencing of the knower in our midst. This, you see, she brings it in here with stanza 2, because this almost identical state of not and not yet, and yet the subtle difference that is there, which we must somehow understand, intuit, gain an insight into. Well then, when we move to stanza 3, we seem to feel we're on safer ground. The 1 and 2, these pre-process and yet process stages, are so difficult to understand that, well, it's with a kind of relief that we come to stanza 3, describing the reawakening of the universe to life, she says, after pralaya, depicting, as she says, the emergence of the monads from their state of absorption within the one. And here she indicates that the term monad may be applied equally to the vastest system and to the tiniest atom. So we have to recognize at this point the term monad does not have a specificity as it has later, but rather can be applied because it is one. Then she moves on. Stanza 4, she says, shows the differentiation of the germ. And the word germ, you see, is so meaningful because it is more than just a point, a dimensionless point. The germ has within it all the potentialities of growth, but it also carries within it the concept of the fruitage of previous systems. It is, the germ is the resultant of previous systems. A germ does not just float into existence out of of itself. It carries within it all that is the past, all the trees that have ever been are comprised in the seed of the trees that will be, so that there is this continuity. And this differentiation into the septenary hierarchy, she says, of conscious divine powers who are the active manifestations of the one supreme energy. And so she gives them various names, the framers, shapers, and ultimately the creators of all the manifested universe, in the only sense in which the name creator is intelligible. I think that's an interesting point. And you'll remember that I suggested that the word creation, it is suggested, comes from an Indo-European root, kri, to grow from within. And of course the process is indeed from within outwards. Generically, these are known as the Dhyani Chohans. The passages in Adam's book are very, very helpful, of course, in this regard. Put together the information very succinctly for us. So then she says in stanza 5, the process of world formation is described. The first diffused cosmic matter, and so on, finally to the planetary chain, and so on. And the subsequent stages are indicated in stanza 6, which of course brings us to that great turning point, she says, in which all the stanzas and verses which follow in this volume 1 refer only to the evolution of and on our earth, and yet in a very subtle way. While stanza 7, she says, continues the history tracing the descent of life down to the appearance of man, it is also a recapitulation. Well, in light of this then, we have to keep in mind, again, something that I pointed out, that the numbering of the stanzas proceeds as though it was not interrupted. And so we speak of stanza 7 as following stanza 6, but there has been an enormous gap, as we know, in the material. She tells us, in fact, that between the 4th and 5th shlokas of stanza 6, cosmic periods of immense duration occur, that 11 stanzas were omitted. So the sequential numbering becomes irrelevant, and is because we are accustomed to sequence, she has used sequence. And I expect that for her it was easier too. But concepts of sequence beginnings and endings have to be abolished. Such concepts become meaningless. Today in contemporary physics, this is certainly true. And physicists dealing with the subatomic level in the realm of particle physics are certainly faced with this fact that you can't put numbers in sequence on the particles. So this is one of the difficult points to apprehend, that sequence becomes irrelevant. On the other hand, for our purposes, we are suggesting that one is generally an infant before one is a youngster, and one is an adolescent before one is a mature individual. And so we are suggesting that it may be helpful, therefore, and we would have to try to deal with this as best we can. Yes, all right, stand up. Marisa says, let's stand up and breathe deep.
Antonio,
He will come one more.
He will come. All right, now, with that all digested, this quick summary, let's now look at stanza 7 in a little more detail. HPB calls it the parents of man on earth. I'm not sure that that's the best description of it, and I think you ought to think of your own description of it. In my own words that I have proposed to you, I used the term sentiency. Others have used the term multiplication. Think of your own term for it. I really am not happy with the parents of man on earth. Prem and Ashish use another term. I think one has to determine for oneself what it will be. They call it simply life.
Please, we're lost. Some of us are lost.
Oh,
Where
page
are we?
213. 213, volume 1. That's 213 in the original. Now, I'm not sure what it is in the Adyar edition. It's the beginning of stanza 7.
It's 260.
260 in the Adyar edition, page 260 in the Adyar edition. And all other editions, I just don't know where it is. You have to find it. Prem and Ashish simply call it life, but it is it's sentiency. It's the stages now by which the process gives rise to man's psychophysical structure. It's an inherent, it's the unique formulation. In other words, what we're dealing with is the unique formulation of life inherent in every level or field of the universe capable of structuring itself. The self-structuring process in terms of sentient existence. The capstone, as it were, of that structuring process is man, the human being. When I use the word man, I'm using it in a generic tense. I'm not thinking of woman as somehow out of the rib of this self-structuring. So that man is minus that element of his self-structure, the rib, but rather that I'm using it quite generically. There are, I hope none among you, but every so often I work with a group. I remember one group of students I had at the Crotona School, one of whom was one of these militant feminists out to change our language, you know, and produced a pile of books that I was supposed to read about sexist language and so on, and you know, when when God was a woman, and all the rest of these things, you see, for me. And it made me very self-conscious about using this word man. And, and she said, didn't I realize that this was, sexist, and we've got to change our language and all the rest. And I said, it never bothered me, really. It just, but she was so militant, you see, that in all my discussions on the Secret Doctrine, she would immediately, sort of come up with, the moment I used it, there was a kind of bell that she was ringing there in class. So I hope none of you feel that way. If you do, I'm sorry for you. But I just don't feel that way, so I will continue to use the generic term.
I came across one in a public lecture like this, and she wouldn't let me get on.
I know it. This is what happens with these people. They become so militant about it. And it becomes, to me, it was a great...
No explanation would satisfy her that man was a generic term for humanity.
Yes, no explanation would ever satisfy this particular person. In any event, what the capstone of this structuring process, in which we therefore are very intimately involved, this universe, so you can put it, and all that it contains, is indeed a shining, a lucent being, the unity of the one, spread forth in the web of time and space. So the study of it is the study of ourselves. He who experiences the whole is man. Or we can say cosmogony is man writ large upon the heavens, and the truth of it is in our very hearts. All our studies are really studies of ourselves. From this point of view, I suppose we are the truly egocentric universe. But it is, because we project ourselves into the multiplicity. Well, I'm going to digress a moment at this point to put this in terms then of the Tibetan text to which Dr. Günther which he has given us. As I've said before, the vocabulary is not easy, and I understand you're having trouble getting the book, so I'm sorry for that. It's published by Shambhala, which is both in Boulder, Colorado, and in London. So I know
The book is available in London, sir. Which book?
Could you just put the title on and the author on the book? I know.
So I shan't have time to get it before I go away.
And it's published by Shambhala Publications.
It's a new book?
1984, I think it is. I'm sure it's 1984. Yes, 1984. And it's Shambhala, Boulder, and London. It says distributed in the United Kingdom by Routledge and Keegan Paul, London, and Henry on Thames. So I would...
It is available, I've seen it.
Yes. So I'm sure... Günther puts it, the whole context of this now, or the whole basis of this now, in the context of the human being, which is the matrix of mystery, or as he puts it, simply by virtue of being a human being, one is caught in a complete yet special presentation of being's mystery. Simply by virtue of being a human being. This is, if you like, the dharma of being human. We're caught in it. We can do no other. You can't say, well, I didn't ask to get here. You did in a sense, of course, because it was the process that unrolled. but one is in a complete, and that's why I say man is the test object of all fields. It's a complete. Within ourselves, all of this is met, up to the present and foreshadowing the future, and yet special, you see, because the fourth in any system, we're in fourth globe, and I'm inclined to think the fourth planetary chain, although I think this is not relevant whether it's the fourth or fifth, but the centrality of the human in this system. Would you agree with me, Adam, the centrality of the human? See, Jeffrey, you agree with that?
Yes, depends what you mean by human.
Well, yes, of course. Man was not created.
The heavenly man model, yes.
The human model, the man model, the heavenly man, the anthropos, you see. And this, of course, has been the Purusha, you see, which is the person, the
Adam.
Yes, Adam yes, because that is the
Eva? I said it.
Yes, I said it.
Those are feminists.
Yes, there's the feminist speaking. So it's both a complete and yet special presentation of being's mystery. And so, therefore, the central question, as Gunther points out, and I'll simply repeat it, those of you who were here last week heard it, the new people, you'll hear it now. How is it then that man, this human stage, is both the encodement, the preserver, and the encoder as transmitter of essential insights into the structure of reality? We are both the encodement and the encoder. And how is it then that we are both of these, the encodement and the encoder of essential insights into the structure of reality? Well, it's a profound mystery, you see. And as it comes to man, he gives us from the Tibetan text, a very, very interesting metaphor, which I suggested last night we'd like to, from time to time, through this week now, explore. I'll read the whole thing, then we'll have coffee, and then we'll discuss it. I'll just read it, and you can just listen. There is one word that may need to be, the word is ogmin. I can only pronounce it as it appears to be, O-G-M-I-N, ogmin. And I'll just have to call it that. There may be another pronunciation for it, but I do not know it. The word itself, it's called the site of ogmin, is not a place in the ordinary sense. It is a coming into presence of a specific richness operating through cognitions that convey the meaningfulness of being. So it's not a place, it's not any place in the ordinary sense. It's not here, there, or somewhere else, you see. But it's a continual coming into presence of this specific richness operating through meaningfulness, through an awareness of meaning.
Again, it's a process.
Yes, a process. All right, now I'm just going to read it, and then we'll have coffee.
What page is it?
This is in the Matrix of Mystery, page 84. Yes. On the site of Ogmin, this no place, having neither a boundary nor a center, within a radiant orb of pristine cognitiveness, whose basis is without measure, there stands a palace ablaze in the preciousness of pristine cognitiveness, not demarcated as to size or the 10 directions. Quadrangular, because the qualities of Buddhahood have spread beyond measure. Decorated with precious projections of 4 super pristine cognitions. Its finial is the spiraling of the meaning-saturated field pristine cognition, which is essentially identical with and not discretely differentiable from all configurations, without exception, of the Buddhas of the 10 regions and the 4 times. This pristine cognitiveness is inconceivable. It assumes distinct and specifically differentiated variations in precious shape and color, and is most lofty and remains immeasurable in scope. Well, that's only the first section that we will look at. Interesting. It's rather interesting to compare it with the numbers that are given us in Shloka 1, stanza 7. I perceive this. Go ahead, Adam.
No, you may. It's all yours.
Well, this may seem, you see, we've said authentic utterance. This is the Logos doctrine in the Theosophical terminology, the authentic utterance, which results in lucency, or which has within it lucency. And Adam reminded me, of course, that at this stage is Daivaprakriti in the system that we have been looking at, which is, of course, lucency, pure lucency. The dynamism, therefore, of the authentic utterance, if you like, of the Logos, is Daivaprakriti.
This is a material aspect to it as well. It's rather like the matter of space.
Yes, that's
Illumined.
right. Illumined. Chidakasham. You see, we use that term very often, Chidakasham. The illumined, Akasha itself meaning the illumined space, the illumined consciousness. So I've now put up the diagram that Günther uses, you see, for this, because what we're talking about, and what we have indeed in Shloka 1, which we obviously are not going to get to in detail here, is this, what we can call, what Günther calls the spontaneous presence of being in the sheer lucency of existence. And it's the behold the beginning, behold is the projection of this, or what he calls a fundamental property of being's mystery, is what is termed its communicative thrust. But that communicative thrust, being's speaking, I've taken it down, the utterance is in terms of a nosemic language, says Günther. I was asking John Algio, who is here as you can see. This word nosemic is not in the dictionaries, but we can seem, S-E-M-E, isn't it? Is it seem or seem? Of course, implies the meaningfulness. And you see, we've already come on this in Günther. The meaning-saturated field is the way Günther would describe Akasha, or this fundamental field. This, as Jeffries just said, we already have the fabric.
Yes, the fabric gives expression to divine thought.
Yes, it's that, and therefore Fohat can impress upon it, or the Lipika can write on it, and all the rest of it. It's a plasticity that is present. The spontaneous presence of being, then, this spontaneous presence is being's speaking, and the utterance he uses is the utterance in nosemic language. And so, for all of this, as I said, Günther, quoting the Tibetan text, uses this concept of the palace, and I'll now read it again, and we can look at it a little more closely. On the site of Ogmin, and remember, he has pointed out that this is not a place in the ordinary sense, but a coming into presence at any time, therefore. It's the, if you like, the ring pass not, but it's which is a self-defining, boundaryless condition. And I'm using the paradox purposely. Having neither a boundary nor a center, so I've put it in broken lines. Within a radiant orb of pristine cognitiveness whose basis is without measure, because we're not at any point of measurability at this stage, there stands a palace, ablaze in the preciousness of pristine cognitiveness. Not demarcated as to size or the 10 directions, but quadrangular, because the qualities of Buddhahood have spread beyond measure. And so it is indeed the squaring of the circle, if you like. There it is, as the squaring of the circle. Decorated with precious projections of the 4 pristine cognitions. Its finial is the spiraling of the meaning-saturated field, the spiraling which we've already looked at in terms of the actions of Foha, which is essentially identical with and not discretely differentiable from all configurations, without exception, of the Buddhas of the 10 regions and the 4 times. Muriel is commenting on the Buddhas of the 4 times.
It's so interesting because it's always referred to as the 3 times.
The 3 times.
I've known the 3 periods of time.
But now it's
Yes.
the 4 times, which is the totality.
Yes, right.
You see. It assumes distinct and specifically differentiated variations in precious shape and color, and is most lofty and remains immeasurable in scope. Within this, then, are the arrangement of thrones in the text. And these thrones are very interesting, and so I've shown the throne rooms, a totality of a throne array, which appears to go within or go without. You know, if you look at it, it either comes out at you or retreats within, in a kind of endless series of mirrors within the withins of the within. It's interesting, on each of these thrones there's said to be a cushion consisting of a precious jewel, which symbolizes the fact that it is man's innate spirituality which may bring about whatever is desired in the throne. And all of this, according to the text, rests inside, all this rests inside a lotus flower, incidentally, so that the Ogmin is really a giant lotus flower on which all of this rests. Again, highly symbolic. Well, the thrones, the following arrangement is rather interesting. In the center is a lion throne, which, according to the text, symbolizes the 4 kinds of intrepidity, the intrepidness. Eastward, an elephant throne, which symbolizes the 10 kinds of strength. Southward, a horse throne, which symbolizes the swiftness of the 4 bases for success: sustained interest, perseverance, firmness of purpose, and scrutiny. Westward, a peacock throne, which symbolizes the 10 kinds of aptitude, and northward, an eagle throne, which symbolizes the unimpeded operation of pristine cognition. Lines upwards. Now this totality of the throne array functions then as points of orientation within our own life world. Points of orientation. And it's constituted then by the, each throne, in other words, serves as a seat for a specific operation of the primordial intelligence or consciousness. And so we seat ourselves, respectively, in these throne rooms. It is said, this self-enthronement which takes place seats us in the universe. It's a kind of self-enthronement. Of course, in the Tibetan tradition, the anthropomorphic diction that's used is called the teacher, who speaks to us then with the voice of being. And of course, we must then recognize the teacher. Well, that's perhaps enough at the moment for the throne room. Now, of course, around this, there is going...
May I add one tiny little bit of picture to that,
Yes.
though I don't know this particular text. The whole thing is seated in the lotus.
Yes.
And the Sanskrit word for the lotus is the pundarika, and this has another meaning which also means revolving.
Revolving.
It's in a revolving
Yes,
lotus.
yes. That's interesting.
Right.
And we had in the third stanza the mantra Padma opening.
Yes.
And the opening reveals the throne rooms in which man seats himself. The king, of course, is the central figure, and we'll come to that. There are a lot of other figures in this. There's a paired operation of the king and queen, in fact. And there are a series of kings in each of the throne rooms. And there's a grouping of them, and then of course there are the guards. Some of them fierce and some of them friendly. The palace guards, and the symbolism goes on and on and on. A very rich symbolism, as I think we can begin to recognize. So
related this to the theosophic concepts.
I'm in the process of trying to, so I'm bringing it to you incomplete, but I don't see why, I thought, well, I'll bring it even at this stage, but I'm trying to relate it. I think it's quite exciting, and that's why I've presented.
So far, what we've been talking about is what I'm going to try and say something quickly about this afternoon, and it is the field of Akasha.
Yes.
The whole field.
The whole field, yes. So this entire Gestalt character, if you like, is expressive of the undivided wholeness in which, in terms of experience, the experiencer is not separable from the experienced, and in which the experiencer becomes an active participant in the unfolding. Never a detached observer. And we've already commented many times on this. So we can move then, in a way, to Shloka 1. Any further comments or questions? Or does this have meaning? Does this begin to reveal a meaning? The field, of course, is always, in the Tibetan translation, they're the meaning-saturated field. It is really saturated. It's completely meaningful. And that, too, I think, Jeffrey, would be equated with Akasha.
Yes, and also with the meditative experience by stages. When the picture begins to unfold, these symbolic terms all mean something.
Yes.
Very significant.
Very significant, yes. You see, this meaning-saturated continuum or field becomes polarized in its expression, and therefore you have paired functions which are known as the kings and the queens in each of the throne
I
room.
think the kings would correspond to the architects,
Yes.
and maybe the queens to the builders. I haven't just had a look at that yet.
Well, because the metaphor in this is that of each king having his noble queen. Let me just read you another passage then from this.
You could put this onto Adam's circular diagram.
Yes, yes, we can overlay Adam's circular diagram, if Adam doesn't object. It's the basis of the mandala, of course, it's the basis of the mandala. Well, to see these kingly operations, each of these kings, and here are the names of the kings, of the fundamental four kings, because fundamentally there are four.
This is the very quaternary, it's
Yes,
not the
that's right.
supernal
Yeah,
triumph.
that's right. Perception, structuring, feeling, and conceptualization. To conceptualize, to be able to extract, and you see, we
Corresponds to visualizing.
yes, in many ways corresponds to visualizing, conceptualize. One has a concept, one is able to conceptualize.
Yeah, this is the fourth of the term, not the first, isn't it?
That's right. And they are
This is
all
expression.
they are all governed by the king in the center, motivation, intentionality, motility. And they inseparably reside with their noble queens. Now the noble queens are a coming into presence expanse. The queens' names all end in expanse, which is interesting. The first is coming into presence, and you see the Matra Padma opens. This is the first stage of the cosmogonic process. Expanse, the coming into presence expands, stability expands, smoothness expands, warmth expands. And these are all governed by the fifth, as the motivation of the king is now governed by vibration. All right, rhythmicity is used. A new word, rhythmicity. So that it's not simply motivation, but vibration. So it is pulsate. And these pairs pervade the infinite realm of meaningfulness, just as oil pervades a sesame seed.
What page is it?
That's 105, Gunnar, in the Matrix of Mystery. Yes. You don't have it yet, do you? But you're going to get it, I'm sure. Yes, yes, Gunnar. Yes. So it's helpful to know the pages on which it comes. Now these, of course, are, you can call them formulated energies as king and queen, resonating in male-female polarity. They're operations and domains which have been thematized into kingly operations with their queenly interactions and so on. So there are many ways one can look at it. I think Jeffrey's right that I think wouldn't this fit in very helpfully with the stages of meditation?
Oh, yes, and it's a huge glyph.
Yes, it's a huge glyph, there's no question.
It would take, a long time to explore all its depth. But what you've just told us now about the kings, you look at all those, they're the active functioning side of things.
Yes.
And the other side is the effects, what is produced. I mean, if you perceive something, you've got to give it extension in some way of space. you can't see nothing.
That's right,
You know?
yes, that's right.
And if you go down all these, you find and structure and stability. As soon as you've got a frame to put things on,
That's right.
that stabilizes your building,
Your
so
building,
to speak.
yes,
Even if it's only an imaginary building.
that's right.
And so you can go down all these things.
All of it,
I don't quite get the feeling smoothness one.
It's interesting. It's interesting, feeling and smoothness. Irene,
Well, one is inoperative without the other, the whole
that's
way
right.
through. Yes.
All the way through.
Yes.
One is inoperative without the other. Yes. Jeffrey, you might like to add to it, there are colors that relate to these.
Interesting. I wonder if we can put them in without looking.
All right. A blaze in the brilliant colors, blue, white, yellow, scarlet.
Oh, crikey.
I thought that would throw you, but I thought I better
Start the
throw
floor at the top.
it. Blue, a blaze in the brilliant colors,
Yes.
blue,
Yes.
white, yellow, scarlet.
Stop. No, stop at yellow. Those are all the colours in the high regions,
Yes.
the spiritual
Yes.
regions.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Well, these are the throne rooms.
yes, but that doesn't relate to the quaternary
No, they
at
don't.
all.
No, I know it.
The scarlet does.
Yes,
must
the
be
scarlet
green in
does.
the north.
And green is in the center.
Yes, there must be green
Oh,
in the
fun,
north.
in
but
the
it's-
centre in this.
Motivation and vibration and stance are equated with the
You can
green.
visualize that card. The last of the diagrams that we did, diagram B,
Yes.
you will see the triangle has
Yes,
those colours
those
you just
colours.
mentioned.
I know it.
But the red one belongs to the
Belongs to the
triangle
triangle
below, in the
below.
cosmic sense.
In the cos, yes.
When you come to deal with man, I couldn't sort it out.
Yeah.
I didn't see it at all.
Well, frequently the Chinese and the Tibetan do use a different color scheme, don't they? One finds.
Well, I wonder,
I'm not sure.
Maybe be not too dogmatic about
Right.
colour. If one's not built.
that's true.
Which
No, I'm
changes at every level anyway, so.
Yes.
It must do, and we don't perceive in the colours, we don't know what they are, unless we've got that sense developed.
We got the orientation of those colors just
Green in the centre, which is unusual, isn't it?
It doesn't, this particular passage doesn't give the
It will
orientation,
begin with the east.
because earlier it gives the orientation
The
as
first one will be to do with the elephant throne in the east.
blue, white,
Oh,
yellow
no, he did this.
in the center.
They give a lantern.
So there is another diagram he gives where he gives it a bit differently, in which he has blue at the center.
That's more traditional.
That would be more traditional. And the green would be the north ring.
Yes, that's.
But in
But
this
of
one,
course,
it
it's like we
seems to
said,
be.
it's a matter of which you focus on, and those
Yes.
are the things that come around it.
That's right. So there is the other possibility, in which white is
East and the
east, yes, and
yellow south.
yellow is south. And, that's right. So there is, he gives another one, but in this,
I think it depends of the purpose of
Your
the
foot.
way of manifesting.
Yes.
well, it's interesting to note, you see.
The red doesn't fit at all.
Well, red will belong to the Amitabha and Kuan Yin ray.
And what do they symbolise? What does their those
Well, you've
rings
heard
mean?
about Kuan Yin in the top part of it already, in stanza 6.
Yes.
That's that ray of action.
Red.
Well, as of course, as in the case of every royal household, we'll have to look at this later, the king with his queen has his vassals, each with their consort, and so there's a fivefold vassalage of the supreme king, and that has to be looked at, and then there are the palace guards and so on, and some of them are rather frightening, and so he calls these, of course, the fury of being. And indeed it is the tranquil and fierce processes of the formulated energies.
We had a whole summer school for fortnight on that end.
I think it would be very interesting, and I'm merely, as I say, I haven't worked out all the correlations, but I decided I'd bring it anyhow and let you work with me on formulating it. Rather than, why should I bring you things that, that are already completed? Then it becomes just a, what all too often education is, a transfer of notes from the teacher's notebook to the student's notebook without passing through the heads of either.
For the hearts.
Yes. So I thought I'll bring it to you incomplete. It's something I've been working on for a couple of years, and
It's just possible there's some lines in it as
there
well.
may well be. I'm not
Because this
saying
is
that
a
there
published
isn't.
work, and
I'm not saying there isn't. No, I've had the book since it was first published in '84, and that's 2 years, and I've been trying to steadily make these correlations, and I have not succeeded. But you see, Yanti has made them with the Upanishads and so on. That's easier, and we feel more at home in that, in a sense. But HPP's teachers were the Trans-Himalayan teachings.
Correct.
And I think, therefore, when we have some of these Tibetan texts now available to us, it merits our attention. I think very much so. And so I feel that this is not far from coming to some of the sources of the stanzas. And that, indeed, as I mentioned, we have a young member in the United States, David Regal, who feels that he has begun to locate the sources of these stanzas. And perhaps I felt very much when I was in Dharamsala at the Dalai Lama's residence in India and spoke to his brother who was in charge of the Tibetan Library and Archive and saw the mass, absolute mass, mound, I should say, tremendous mound of manuscripts in, of course, the traditional form as palm leaf and so on, bark and so on, bound together, brought out of Tibet, the majority of which have not yet been translated. The vast majority, even of the Lam Rin texts, to which HPB makes reference, as you know, in the fifth volume of the Adyar edition, the third volume of her work, and in one of the posthumously published papers, I'm not sure it's in volume 12 or 13 or 14, but on the Lam Rin text, she refers to these very clearly, doesn't she, as the source of much of this information, you see. And these are vast texts. And when I was there, the Dalai Lama's brother told me, there are numerous, it's a huge library, just the Lam Rin library. Whether all of it was brought out of Tibet from some of the monasteries to Dharamsala, and now they really, at that time, didn't know. Of course, much more has been done. That's 10 years ago that I was there. So, of course, much more has been done. And much more is becoming available to us through scholars such as Ginton.
the Dalai Lama's brother talk English?
Yes,
Were you
very well.
speaking directly?
No, I spoke directly with him. The Dalai Lama at that point was speaking very little English, although he's speaking much more English now. But 10 years ago, he was not speaking too much English. But his brother had been at Indiana University, where there is, of course, quite a Tibetan studies program at the University of Indiana. And he spoke very good English, quite extensively. He came to see us the next night, so I'm striding across the road where we were staying at the tourist bungalow in Lower Dharamsala. And we had a wonderful visit with him. I felt the temperature like today. It was marvelous. And then, of course, the Himalayas with snow-capped peaks in the distance. Wonderful. But he spoke quite good English. And he took us through the Tibetan Library and Archive. And at that time, much work had to be done. But this is coming out now. And that's why I think, at least I feel, we have to be alert to it. Because HPP is very definite. Her teachers were the Trans-Himalayan philosophy. They were Tibetan teachers. And perhaps buried in amongst all of those masses of manuscript material. Wonderful things, which, of course, were all, I was going to say Greek to me, but it was certainly all Tibetan to me, you know, carefully handwritten, you see, on bark and palm leaf and all the other things, that, not papers, we have it, but very carefully, now to be deciphered. And many of them to be put back, there's a project, you may know, to put many of these back into the original Sanskrit, because some of these came originally in a very early form of Sanskrit, not the form that is being taught today, or that is in use today, but early forms of Sanskrit. And so the effort, there's quite an effort to put them, to retranslate them into the early Sanskrit. Then eventually one hopes into English, but this is years down the line. But I kept looking at this and saying somewhere in that mound is going to be the authentication of these stanzas. Not in terms of the original that HBV refers to, as in a symbolic language or the mystery language of Censar, but in at least one of the variations of its later transmission. I just kept feeling that if I could somehow, you know, by some one of the lower Sidleys, although at the moment it would be higher for me, certainly, reach in and pull out the manuscript that would have all of this in some form, one would find this same depiction of the cosmogonic process. In any event, it's interesting to theorize. But it's for that reason that I feel it's useful to struggle with some of these texts that are now coming into the West. And all I can do is struggle with the English, which is beastly enough, as you can see, as you can hear. You see, the translations that Günther uses. But his very extensive footnotes, or notes in the back, they're not footnotes, they're notes at the end of the whole book, help in the explanation of the terms, you see. And as they point out again and again, what we're dealing with is primarily this question: how has it happened that we as humans find ourselves in this or that throne room? And as he points out, that despite the anthropomorphic diction of the text itself makes it quite clear that the creator of universes is not some form of superperson or God. Consequently, his use of this term authentic utterance, a communication in the self-referential context. So you struggle with me. Yes, Ellen.
Add a little footnote to what you've been saying. As you were presenting this business about the throne room and thrones, another set of memories came back to me from something that I'd studied as a result of what it says in the Secret Doctrine, and that comes from the Jewish tradition, and that's the Sefer Yetzirah.
Yes.
Now, the language of the Sefer Yetzirah is every bit as obscure as the language that this is being presented in. And it's useful, I think, to realize that it doesn't matter how cleverly you translate it or whatever way you put it, it's not just a question of getting the language right and then suddenly it's all going to be immediately clear to us. What Günther has called a nosemic language, I think, is probably the key to this. You've got to understand it in completely a different way, and merely to try and think, if I master the terms, the whole thing will suddenly become clear to me, is a deep mistake. And if you could bear with me for a minute, there's a passage in the SD where she translates a bit out of the Sefer Yetzirah, which has, for me anyway, I don't know whether it would for everyone else, it has a number of parallels to what you've been saying. So may I just read?
Which page?
This is on page 92.
Of
volume
the
one.
volume one?
In the body of the text, she says, in the Sefer Yetzirah, it is stated that, and she quotes, God engraved in the holy four the throne of his glory, the Ophanim, the wheels or world spheres, the seraphim, the sacred animals, and the ministering angels. And then she goes on in the vast footnote underneath it to give you an extract from the Sefer Yetzirah, and the feel of it, to me, is very, very similar to what you've got here.
Yeah.
But again, the language is obscure, and just at a first reading, it doesn't necessarily mean a great deal. 10 numbers without what? 1, the Spirit of the living God, who liveth in eternities. Voice and spirit and word. So you've got the whole mode of expression, authentic utterance, voice and spirit and word. And this is the Holy Spirit. 2, Spirit out of Spirit. He designed and hewed therewith 22 letters of foundation, 3 mothers and 7 doubles and 12 singles, and 1 spirit out of them. 3, water out of spirit. He designed and hewed with them the barren and the void, the mud and the earth. He designed them as a flower bed, hewed them as a wall, covered them as a paving. Maybe that's where the smoothness comes
That
from.
may be the smoothness.
4, fire out of water. He designed and hewed therewith the throne of glory. Again, you see it comes back to these thrones, the same image being used. And the wheels, and the seraphim and the holy animals and the ministering angels, and the 3 he founded in his dwelling. Again, you see the whole idea of a dwelling.
Of a
throne
dwelling,
room,
a throne room.
perhaps. As it is said, he makes his angels and spirits and his servants fiery flames. And then HBB comments, which words founded his dwelling shows clearly that in the Kabbalah, as in India, the deity was considered as the universe,
Yes.
and was not in his origin, the extra cosmic God he is now.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because it is, you see, page 92 in volume 1. Yes. A marvelous, yes, thank you very much, Adam. These things, you see, this is why I said last week in introducing all of this, it does help to have some familiarity with the vast range of cultures and symbolic languages of these cultures to which HPB referred. And as I said, it wasn't the artifacts to which she referred, but rather to their metaphysical base, the manner in which they perceive, because it's built on the manner in which the universe is perceived. We perceive.
It's interesting, isn't it, that this symbolism that Adam's just read out, I can't say it means nothing, it means little. Whereas as you read that one, it meant a lot. Now, what makes this difference in perception in us? 2 different people, 2 different views of the same thing. We're obviously talking about the same thing, I think.
Dimension.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is
We're
interesting.
different-
Dimension.
We're different in interior quality or something.
Yeah.
Thinking of this evenness, this smoothness, which is described as in the realm of Amitabha in the west, and all of his pure lands are very traditionally described as absolutely even, no hills, no valleys. I feel it's something to do with that before differentiation, or us getting back to the non-differentiation, not a tenth of an inch's difference. To do with that kind of,
That kind of, yeah.
I don't know, but they're always traditionally described very,
Interesting.
yes.
But we begin to see these links, you see, and why, you see, HPB had some things available, she didn't have other things available. Imagine if she'd had this text available, for example, that Enter now has translated.
Maybe she just has something in the private tissue.
May well have, I'm sure she did have it. But it's true. And the feelings we obtain from the response that we have. Any other comments or questions? Well, rather than take up specifically Shloka 1 then, which I will then defer until tomorrow and look further at this. Let's turn again to the course you have. And although those of you who were here last week looked at page 1, the introductory, I'm going to ask you to look at it